Okay, so no Game of Thrones tonight. That's extremely sad for me, but we're gonna talk about X-Men Days of Future Past, full-on spoilers. So let's just get right into it. I really love this movie. In case you haven't seen my non-spoiler review, you can go check it out, it's on this channel. I really enjoyed the opening to this movie, how it just set the stage for everything that was gonna happen. It shows the Sentinels in the future, how destructive they are and how they just kill all the X-Men. That was brutal to see. I just honestly didn't expect them to show the X-Men getting killed in such brutal fashions. Because when you think about it, there's some really brutal kills in that movie. Iceman just basically got his head crushed. Colossus got torn in half, even though he's just metal. Like, that's why they could do something like that in this movie, because they're mutants and not real people to the MPAA, but nevertheless, showing that stuff is really hard to watch, in my opinion. But I'm glad they did that because it made the movie that much better. And I really enjoyed how this movie spent most of its time in the past, because I really do love that cast with Fassbender and McAvoy and Lawrence. One thing I didn't expect was Mystique to have such a big part in this story. I mean, you would imagine that if they were going to have a mutant do something bad in the past, it would be Magneto, and they didn't have it. Mystique was the one that killed Trask, and that was interesting how they incorporated that. Her powers went into the Sentinels, and that's why they're so powerful now. That was a really well done thing. These thoughts are going to be pretty jumbled, but I'm thinking about this part now. Magneto and Professor X on the plane in the past, that whole sequence was great. Like, they had two specific scenes I remember. The first one was them arguing, and that was just such an intense scene, because both of them have valid arguments in this, and that's what makes it so interesting. That's what makes X-Men so interesting as a whole, because you feel for both sides, really. You could see where Magneto's coming from, and you could see where Professor X is coming from. And in that scene, I felt Michael Fassbender did a really good job of, like, portraying an Ian McKellen-ish accent, because you could just feel it in his voice. That's not his exact accent. So I thought he did a good job with that scene. And then they played chess together, too. Just, I could watch, like, them on a plane for a whole movie, and I would be happy. Bolivar Trask in the movie, the way they handled him, Peter Dinklage did a great job. I just felt like the character did not really do much besides just be there to create the Sentinels and hate everything. And people say, oh, he doesn't really hate the mutants, he just wants to cure them. Like, people who say that, when they say, oh, I don't hate you, I just want to mass genocide you, I don't believe that they don't hate that species. So I feel like Bolivar Trask hates the mutants, and that's all you really get from him. You never really get any development for him. He just kind of is there to make the Sentinels, and that's all you know about him. And that's a little disappointing, but that didn't hinder my enjoyment too much in the movie. And another thing I want to talk about, I have little inconsistencies I noticed in this movie that I want to talk about. One of them being, and these things, mind you, don't bother me to the point where I would bring the movie down a rating. It's just, I noticed them, and I want to know what's going on. Like, in the future now, Wolverine has metal claws. At the end of the Wolverine, in the mid-credits sequence, he had bone claws, and that was 2 years after the events of the Wolverine, so it's not like it was just right after and then he got his metal claws back. They just went from having bone claws at the end of that one to metal claws in this one, and that was just, it was odd. Like I said, it didn't bother me, I just noticed it and I wish they had addressed it. Like, even if they just said, oh, Magneto gave me back my metal claws, because he could probably do that, that would be fine. I just wish they kind of addressed it. One thing that was interesting to me was Wolverine was pretty much absent from the finale of this movie because, you know, Magneto flung him into the water with all those poles stuck in him. That was interesting because I figured that Wolverine would just have a big part and he would just, like, end up killing a lot of things or Sentinels. But it ends up just being a really intense, like, conversation type thing between Magneto, Professor X, and Mystique about what's gonna happen if they're gonna kill Trask or not. And that was so much better, I thought, because I thought it was just going to be a big, giant sequence full of action. And there was definitely action in the finale, but it was so much more interesting to watch because of the way they handled it. One of the other inconsistencies I was talking about was how they had Stryker in this movie, and hypothetically, before this movie started, X-Men Origins was still technically canon, so in that movie, I think it was in the 80s, maybe late 70s, early 80s when Wolverine gets into the Weapon X program, and at that point Stryker was like 50 years old, and in this one he looks like he's maybe 25 or 30. So just things like that. I assume they're going with that Stryker if they want to bring him into future movies, and that's fine, and they might do Weapon X over again, who knows, because Mystique breaking Wolverine out of that, not even breaking him out, but just getting him away from the people, I assume that she is just getting him away to get him away from humans, and then she's just gonna leave him. Like, I don't assume that Mystique is going to go ahead with the Weapon X program and give Wolverine his metal claws. That's not gonna happen, but her helping him get away from humans was a nice thing to watch, because if they got a hold of him, he was screwed, like any mutant. And yeah, this movie, it resets the entire timeline, and I've thought about this, and I know a lot of people are really excited because, oh, X-Men 3 and X-Men Origins are now not canon, but so is every other X-Men movie, and that's something that while I like the fact that they have a clean slate to move forward with Apocalypse, and that can be really cool, I feel like I'm a little cheated here, because I got really invested to all the other movies. Even if you don't like 3 or Origins, and I don't like 3, don't worry. There was still the Wolverine, there was still X-Men 1 and 2, there was First Class. First Class is still canon, never mind about that. But everything else, it kind of gets taken away now, and I don't know, I feel a little sad because of that. Like, future Wolverine still has all those memories in his head, like, he'll still remember the Wolverine in X-Men 1, 2, 3, and Origins and everything, but it didn't really happen, and like I said, I'm glad they have a clean slate to work with now, because they can introduce certain characters that they fucked up royally, so that's cool, but I don't know. I have mixed feelings about this. Speaking of Apocalypse, the end credits sequence of this movie features Apocalypse, and I know literally nothing about Apocalypse except that he is the first mutant and he is from Egyptian times, as you can see in the credits sequence where he's putting together the pyramids. That was a cool scene to watch. I mean, Apocalypse looked like he was from the Make-A-Wish Foundation. I mean, I thought he was like this giant guy. I don't know how that's gonna work in the movie. Like, every picture I've seen of Apocalypse has him, like, being the size of, like, Thanos, and here he just kind of looked like a very bony kid. Maybe that's it. Maybe he's just a kid in this sequence and he'll get bigger and then we'll see him as giant Apocalypse in the next movie. Nevertheless, the end credits sequence was cool. It got me excited for the next movie as if the rest of the entire movie before it didn't. So X-Men Days of Future Past is still a great movie. I really enjoyed it. I can't wait to go see it again. What'd you guys think of this movie? Spoiler-filled comments, whatever you want. Write your beautiful comments down there. Tell me what you think. And if you like this video, hit that subscribe button down there. Because if you don't, I'll go into the past to stop reviewing. Whatever.